Welcome to The Village Lantern, a podcast for families living with hidden challenges such as autism and other neurodiverse conditions, and for anyone else wanting to understand, love and support. Our mission is to build understanding, empathy and love for families living with one or more children who have hidden conditions that make life harder in one way or another. We call this extra zing.
I've met a few families over the years who've got the suspicions about their child being autistic and have said, I don't want to push for a diagnosis because I don't want them to be labelled and I don't want that to follow them around. And I said, but my belief is that is your child. That is your child. It's not a label, it's who they are. They are autistic.
Hey, Char and Bel, good to see you again. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Good, thanks.
Thanks for having us back.
Are you happy to be back?
Happy to be back, yes.
Yeah. What did you, I know we were hoping that people might tell us what they thought about our first conversation. Have you heard any feedback?
Yeah, it's been really positive. I don't know about Belle, but I think we were both a bit nervous about, you putting yourself out there and, talking about your life. And often you've kept quite a lot of it quiet and secret, and it shouldn't be, and I think there's that element of nerves, but I've had so many people just get in touch saying this is really going to help a lot of families, and that's kind of what we're doing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, that just gave me a big relief, I think.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I think it's just nice to have people get in touch and say, oh, can you talk about this? Oh my God, are you going to can we mention that? I think that's what we want. We want people to get involved and, start bringing out stories that we've all been desperate to hear on podcasts and, the alternative family life that isn't being discussed on main platforms.
Yeah.
Anne and I had a similar experience. It did feel like the podcast sort of outed us a lot more than maybe I had expected, but I kind of loved that because it meant that more people in my broader community, I suppose, were aware of all of our lives and what it's like living with neurodiverse children.
Because it does sort of get to the point where you kind of only share the details with the other people in your community, doesn't it? And so there's a point where your other friends are like, I didn't know. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
And that's not intentional. But it is a bit of self-protection though, isn't it? Because
and I think with some older friends who might have known your children for a long time, you may have never been really explicit with them about a diagnosis or what those challenges are if you're not seeing them all the time. So I think that was really great. I felt kind of proud to actually be more explicit about it and to say, hey, listen to this if you really want to understand more about neurodiversity and our family and, our community. I think it's great. Even my siblings and parents, listened and learnt a lot. So,
amazing. So in this episode, we talk about diagnosis, and because I think what you just said, Belle, not everyone knows the ins and outs of the whole thing, and I think we feel like for listeners, talking about this is probably something that's very, very much of a shared experience. Absolutely, the way we respond to it's different, but the shock, the unknown, the response, how we respond is different for all of us, but it's a very real thing we all share. And so in this episode, you'll hear us sharing some of our own experiences and then, hopefully talking about some things. We want to try and keep things pretty positive but real. And so given we're all a little bit further down the path, if there's anything that we can share that helps people who are either at the beginning of that journey or they're still kind of working through it in different ways, that hopefully that's of value. So we hope you love it. Hey guys, welcome back to our second conversation together. So excited. I've had lots of really encouraging feedback from people about bringing you guys in, adding you to the mix with our conversations with Jordan and mixing that up.
That's good. I'm glad we didn't get fired after one go.
Vaginas of steel.
Exactly. No,
we'll get some T-shirts printed.
Hashtag.
We should. Yeah. And so today I'm excited that we are going to talk about diagnosis of our kids, the discovery that our child has got a set of symptoms that exist in a book somewhere that tell medical people something. I think there's so much complexity to this And I don't, of course, while I like to think that I have a medical degree from Google, which my GP very, very generously allows me to bring my synopsis of situations whenever I come into her. Also, our paediatrician very generously listened to me coming up with my own assessments. But I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that getting diagnosed with, for example, diabetes is probably not the same like complexity of getting diagnosed with a neurodiverse condition, only because maybe people with diabetes display the same symptoms, and maybe because the same medication can be used to treat those symptoms. Again, I don't know, but I'm guessing, and I guess what I'm trying to convey is that with these type of diagnoses, it's not always the same symptoms. There's groupings, and that's how they can make it, but they're not always the same. They don't play out the same. Medication does not result in the same, nor does therapy. There's no kind of X plus Y equals B, clear solution, and therefore it's just a lot and worth talking about, sharing our experiences, and hopefully finding some kind of shared, feelings, emotions.
And helping people. Information. Yeah. I think that's a lot of people who are pre-diagnosis stage are in a point where they're kind of at their wits' end with either their children displaying behaviour that they don't know what to do with, and they don't really know where to go, and they don't understand what the process is, and they can't get into a psychologist, and yeah.
And some people have awareness that a diagnosis could be a possibility, but some people don't. Some people are just like, I don't know why my kid's doing this. Full stop.
I didn't. I got a shock.
I think I did too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me too, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because when my 9-year-old was diagnosed at 3 or 4, which is pretty young, and I had suspicions, but no one had ever mentioned the word autism.
Yeah.
So even when he was under assessment, they never mentioned what it was they were assessing him for.
Was it possible that they could have come out with different outcomes, or were they only doing an assessment of autism?
Well, I just don't know, because I'd flagged to the health visitor, this is in England, we have probably got a slightly different system to you, but I'd flagged to the health visitor that he was displaying some interesting behaviours which I thought were really kind of quirky and eccentric.
Like what? What were they?
So he was doing things like, so if we go for a walk, he would say the same phrases at the same point on the walk every time.
Repetitive behaviour.
He was repeating a book that I'd read him the night before, word for word, whilst running up and down the living room, backwards and forwards. And he was always mimicking voices. So for quite a lot of his childhood, he had the kind of Hungarian nanny's voice.
Give us an example. Oh my God.
But it would be like, Sunday morning I'd wake up and he'd be in bed with me. It's like I'm in bed with a 36-year-old woman from, Budapest. So I flagged these things, and the health visitor said, look, lots of kids are eccentric and display the behaviours that are unique, and they might just grow out of them, but we'll just keep an eye on things and we'll put you through the system to get some assessments and stuff. And she told me to Google a few things, and Asperger's came up, and I was like, oh, because I thought autism was like kind of no talking, non-verbal.
Or Rain Man.
Rain Man, you just don't, I didn't really know. And I was like, Asperger's, what's that? A bit weird. And
you hadn't heard of Asperger's?
No.
Really?
At that point. And I thought, oh, this sounds like him, because it's, he's very much, kind of quite intense and never seems
really
to stop.
Smart.
Super smart, into one subject, doing, a lot of learning on one thing. He was also holding his toys really close to his eye and, doing everything at eye level. But we also never seemed to ever be able to play together. Like he wanted me to be an audience member of his games, but not play with him. And I thought that was quite, I could see all my friends playing with their kids, and I said, oh, I don't think I've ever played with him. We just sit side by side and he would instruct me on what to do.
But you noticed that at the time?
I did, but he was my first child.
That's
so
what I mean.
Okay, I just thought he's super cool. What a cool kid I've got. I'm so lucky.
Yeah.
And then they're like talking about assessments, and I said, well, why? Because I'm just so lucky I've got this really cool kid.
Yes.
And
are you assessing him for his coolness?
Honestly, it was like, oh, when he goes to school, he's probably going to have to go up a few years.
Yeah.
He's so clever.
Yeah.
Everyone who meets him is like, wow, he's only 2. I mean, he chats like a 45-year-old man.
Yep.
You know, really,
or a woman from Budapest.
Or women from Budapest.
But they didn't.
They never mentioned the word
behavioural or neurodiversity.
And even like, so it was so strange. And I went along, and in fact, I was like, you know, it takes ages to get these appointments. I went to the appointment after 6 months, and in that time, you know, his nursery had said, you know, he's squeezing our faces quite a lot, and he's bashing a kind of cart in the garden over and over again, and that was all he would want to do, and he wouldn't really join in with the group. And by the time the appointment came around, he sort of had settled in more at nursery, and I just got used to his behaviours, I guess. And I almost wanted to apologise and say, look, I know it's really, you know, it's so hard to get these appointments. I'm so sorry we're wasting your time.
Yeah, everything's fine.
You know, and he was doing all this assessment where they were like doing things like, you know, he had to play with a merry-go-round. And I was like, look, he's acing these tests.
Oh my God, I had exactly the same experience.
Yeah. Yep. I'm like, I'm so sorry about wasting your time.
Yeah.
And literally within seconds of finishing the assessment, they sat down and said, so your son is definitely autistic, and he's been masking for years and is clearly incredibly anxious for doing that. And I felt like kind of my world dropped out of my stomach.
Yeah.
And I was, even though in the back of my mind I thought he was autistic, I just thought they were going to go, no, sorry, it's it's totally, don't worry. And that was that. And I was like, what? I mean, I hadn't even taken Sonny, my husband, with me to that appointment because I thought, you know, it will be in and out, and you know, and they said, yep, he's 100% definitely autistic, and he's been masking for many years. Like that's why he's sort of he's being able to mask really well. He can adapt into any situation and mask. And I thought, God, the poor kid.
Yes.
The poor kid he's you know, by this point he was 3 or 4. I was like, how can a 3 or 4-year-old be so anxious and masking in different environments? You know, awful. Why he can't be himself? So who is this child? Who is he? You know,
that's I can't believe they didn't actually prepare you a little bit more for that.
No, I mean, I'd say that now. If anyone who's working in the kind of, you know, assessment industry, whatever you call it, psychologist,
speech pathologist, doctors,
educationist. What's the catch-all for that? You know, don't hide what it is you suspect, because we got really paranoid. Like between Sonny and I, we were both sitting there going, "Are we going mad? Like, do they think he's autistic? He's not autistic, is he?" And then we're like, we'd look at each other and go, I think he's autistic, and he'd go, no, he's not.
But you don't know. How would you know?
I don't know.
How would we know?
I'm not an expert.
I know, and I was the same. I do wonder about whether they sort of tell you what they suspect or not, because I feel like that could go 2 ways. Because if they tell you, then you worry before you need to.
Don't you think though, Anne, in Australia, if you're going through the assessment, like in my experience, it's like we're going to go through the assessment for autism or ADHD, you pretty much have it. Like from a psychologist or a pediatrician going through that process, it's very rare that
I've heard people say they haven't.
Really? Yeah. I've never had anyone go through that and hasn't, just because if you've had therapy for several years prior to that assessment, the person who's recommended you do the assessment.
I've heard people, they went in to get assessed and they didn't come out with it.
Well, it's interesting because my diagnosis for my eldest child was very different to that, because we had been going to various assessors, psychologists, therapists since they were 3, and a paediatrician actually from 6 months. And I would go and I'd say, there's something wrong. And they would be like, no, there's not.
Is that because crying, unsettled?
Screaming.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Screaming all the time and really
anxious.
Charismatic though. So at 6 months old, I remember going into the paediatrician and I was like at my wit's end, like they don't sleep, they're screaming all the time. The paediatrician does all the testing, like medical testing. And there's my kid going, oh, you're making all these gorgeous noises and engage and eye contact and all this sort of thing. And they're like, it's a beautiful kid. You're such a healthy child.
Yes.
You just need a bit of colic.
Yeah, or mum's a bit stressed.
Yeah.
You know.
Actually, he was quite amazing because he was like, you need to get this kid to sleep because the behaviours are worse because
of
the sleep.
course.
So that was helpful to know that.
Though you couldn't actually do it, like you knew what you had to do. Okay, great, that's helpful. But how do I do that?
How? Yeah.
And then it was just a series of different psychologists and therapy of people saying, yeah, you know, I understand why you're here, but I'm not necessarily seeing particular things.
But they need to come to the school, come and live at my house. That's the difference, isn't it? Like I think that's where most of that, in your most natural state or in the state where you are not in a weird room with someone weird looking at you, that's when you need them to be looking.
Yeah.
I think that would be more helpful.
Yeah. But by the time we found Fiona, who is my eldest psychologist, who is a specialist in autism and neurodiversity, I mean, I didn't necessarily think that the 14-year-old who was back then sort of 8 and 9 was necessarily autistic. But
you thought ADHD first, didn't you?
They got diagnosed with ADHD first. But Fiona was like, there's more coming.
Now, don't we always say that now? We're like, oh, everyone starts with ADHD.
Yeah. So that's why we didn't, you know, and of course the 14-year-old always says, Mum never told me I had ADHD. But that was only because Fiona was very clear, because they were a specialist in neurodiversity, that wasn't the primary issue. It was like, yes, your child has ADHD, but they also have perfectionism and anxiety. So let's tackle those two things and let's see where it goes. And then she basically said to Scott and I, I think that it's time to do the assessment, but let's just wait until your child shows some interest in it, because there's no rush. We're doing the therapy that they need.
Yes.
You've got all the support that you need at the moment, and do you want the diagnosis or not? And we were like, let's just see how we go. And then I remember we watched this BBC documentary called Are You Autistic? And I said to Scott, get the other two out of the room. I want to watch this and let's see what happens. So the two of us sat there and we watched it, and they just looked at me. I think they were 11 at the time. They looked at me and they were like, Mum, am I autistic? Like, these are my people. They didn't say these are my people. And I said, look, I don't know. We haven't done the assessment. Do you want to do it? Absolutely, I want to do it. I want to do it properly.
Oh, I want to nail it.
I want to do it properly. I want the DSM-5. Yeah, it was like, I want the diagnosis criteria. I want to read it. I want to understand it. I want to know everything. And so then when my child contacted their psychologist, wrote an email and said, I've just watched this documentary. I feel like a lot of this is me. I want to go through the process. How quickly can I do it? And we went from there, and I was really relieved. The diagnosis was, I feel like I've been waiting for that for 11 years.
Because at that age, I feel like you must be at that age relieved. And when
I could label it.
Yeah.
I was like, this has been hard.
Yeah, girls, right? I mean, girls get missed so much.
Yeah.
So your 9-year-old was 4, Char, and your 11-year-old.
Yeah.
So
and the ADHD was 8.
Yes.
So that
which was quite early for a girl, isn't it?
Well, we did, a neuropsychologist did hours and hours of testing, because that was based on IQ testing, that the school had done some testing and the school had said, this is the level of IQ we want to see if we want to investigate further. And I didn't want them to be labelled in a particular way. So then the psychologist and us were like, well, we can do all this testing and we can see what their cognitive capability is and their intellect is, and we can see where the gaps are. And so that testing was really interesting. That brought the ADHD to the forefront. What was really helpful to go through the neuropsychology testing, which was like 4 hours of testing of this child, was that we could see, they said, this kid who is 8 can problem solve like a 16-year-old. That level is that high, but their executive function is below an 8-year-old, below their current age.
Yep.
So for us, the best thing about that was there is a massive gap.
Yeah, the information, the specific information, and then they can tell you, what does executive functioning mean? When is it required? When is it going to present as a problem?
Yeah, so that's why that was useful, because I knew that there was, yes, you had this brain, but there was all this other stuff going on that I wanted to know.
Yeah.
I wanted to understand why they were struggling with certain things, rather than just label them and go, you're really smart.
Yep.
Why can't you actually complete certain tasks?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's for me where I find, having received diagnoses now for everyone in my family, really, to be really useful, because I love specific detail and I love to know when to push the child or yourself, because you know that there's a capability there and that it's just growth and development, and when to actually give yourself a break and when to accept and love yourself and find other ways to do the things that you have to do.
I think that's really important to mention because, I've always wanted to just get behind my son's eyes and, find out what makes him tick. And I've met a few families over the years who've got the suspicions about their child being autistic and has said, I don't want to push for a diagnosis because I don't want them to be labelled and I don't want that to follow them around. And I said, but this is my belief, and obviously everyone has their own beliefs, but my belief is that is your child. That is your child. It's not a label, it's who they are. They are autistic. So the sooner you kind of get your head around that and embrace it and learn about what is making their brain tick, the better it's going to be for your child.
But what you could also do is accept the child. If you don't like the word autistic, because you have to kind of ask yourself, what is it specifically that I don't want?
Yeah. What are you triggered by that?
Yes.
Word?
Is it what other people, and I think it's really important to talk about this because one, there's getting the diagnosis, getting the label, so to speak, and then it's how you feel about that. And then it's, do you want to tell others? Right. Yes. And that's sort of identifying as or not, or coming out, so to speak. But before that, you have to be able to really unpack for yourself if I have a problem or not about it. And then this thing we talked about last week about revealing something about our child without their consent. Yeah. There's all those layers and it is very personal. And I wonder if someone doesn't want to have their child diagnosed or doesn't want to accept that their child's autistic, but can they accept that their child sees the world in a different way, has different needs, requires certain support? If they don't like the word, leave it behind. What I found helpful about the word is that you can tell others when you bring your child into different scenarios. To some degree, people understand what that means. Unfortunately, it's such a broad thing. You can't just go, my child's autistic. You good? You got it? Bye. You have to be able to say, and for them, it means blah, 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 blah. But you could equally come in and go, my child has severe anxiety. My child can't cope with change or needs warning. My child needs to have someone with them so they feel safe. And you could say all of those things without saying they're autistic. In some instances, people will get it. In other instances, people will be like, oh, helicopter parent. Like, we're good. We know how to look after kids. And actually, in those instances, when you can say, well, actually, they're autistic, then they go, oh. And whether they understand or not, they do know that there's something that they don't know, and therefore they're not going to bring their own knowledge of, we know how to handle kids here. Yep. Thanks for your advice, helicopter mum. So I think that's where the word or the medical term or the recognised term is helpful in those instances.
That label can help you so much when you're in a school environment, in education, which we'll talk about in another episode, because you then say, these are the accommodations my child needs.
Yep.
They're autistic.
Yep.
Like a friend who's got an autistic child was telling me the other day, actually the autistic child told me the other day, that they need to wear their hair up for school because they go to a private school.
Yeah.
And they don't. It's like someone is sticking pins in their head, having their hair up.
Horrible.
And so they wear their head down. And some of the teachers tell them off for it. Oh, excuse me, you need to put your hair up.
Where's your ribbon?
Where's your ribbon? And so they wrote a letter there in year 8. They wrote a letter to the school. Hello, hi. I'm autistic and when I pull my hair up, it feels like this. So I need to wear my hair down. Could you please pass this on to everybody, CC, the coordinator.
Great.
And that label, fine.
Yeah.
But that label was critical in that conversation.
Yes.
Because people then, the teachers then had to kind of respect that and understand that.
Yeah.
And then she could explain it in that way because it's a sensory issue for her.
Yeah. And I think the other one that comes up a lot, which, I've talked to a lot of parents about, is how do you tell your child?
Yeah.
And you told us last week, Char, about your amazing creative approach to delivering the news to your child.
Well, it was interesting because we didn't tell him till he was 7, which is quite a long time to know something about your child and then be none the wiser. And what I absolutely hated was the fact that we were talking about something in whispered terms. It was like, we're talking about cancer or something. And it's not, it became this kind of weird, dirty secret when actually it was anything but. And it was, we were hiding letters, we were hiding books, there were whole Netflix series we were hiding, because we were trying to educate ourselves. And then we're like, why, this is him. Why are we hiding this from him? But the school had told us to not tell him too soon. They said that often kids can use it as an excuse. And I said, oh, what do you mean? They're like, well...
Oh, they might say they need a break.
Oh, I can't, sorry, it was my autism that made me do this. And I said, well, but I don't know.
Maybe it was their autism that made them do that.
Exactly.
Maybe they're 7, like give them a break.
Exactly.
And maybe they were late for school because of their autism, because they hate change and transitions.
Exactly.
It was so difficult.
Weird.
It's so difficult to be, because you know, at this point you're just taking advice, right? Because you're like, I don't know, I've never had an autistic child. And so this, you know, person seems to know what to do. So they're telling us not to tell him. And yet we were like, if we don't tell him, we're going to explode. It's like, this is crazy. So we went to see a psychologist and said, right, we need your help to tell him. And she gave us this really dry leaflet. And we were like, are you kidding? He's going to look at this and just cry and go, what? It's like saying, you know, here's a neurological condition that you have. Goodbye. It's like, what? He's a 7-year-old. He's not going to, you know, be handed a leaflet. And then
was it a leaflet for adults?
I don't even know. It was for kids, even worse. It was for kids. And it was just like, oh, you know, this is how in England it's all very dry. Anyway, Sonny and I, being advertising creatives, we were like, well, this isn't good enough. We've got to sell this to him as a really good thing, because we need this to go well. This is going to be his first time he's going to hear about this. We can't just go, we've got something to tell you, here's a leaflet. So he was really into Star Wars, I think, at the time, and aeroplanes. And so we were like, we're going to create a PowerPoint presentation, but we're going to put in all stuff he loves, because autistic people, we know, you know, they want, if something doesn't relate to them, they're not interested. So it's like, if we were going to do a presentation about autism and not involve stuff that he was into, he wouldn't believe it was about him. He would be like, what are you talking about? So we built the whole presentation on stuff that he loved, with photos and pictures of the family. So it's like, you know, we explained, you know, everyone's different. People have different hair colors, eye colors, freckles, you know, different heights, whatever. And just how everyone physically looks different. Everyone's brains are different, and some people's brains are autistic, and your brain is autistic. And this is what this means. And we put, you know, this is what you might find easier than some people. You know, you're really caring with your family, you've got an amazing memory, you're really good at kind of memorizing texts, and he's brilliant at kind of singing and putting on plays, and he's got a huge imagination. And we listed all the brilliant things, and we said, and these are the things that you might find more challenging, you know, changing what you're doing, or, you know, not being able to play with kids in the way that you want to play with them, and having to control an environment. And we went through the whole presentation. I remember being incredibly nervous, because we were like, I was just really worried I was going to cry, which was weird, because I think because it was such a big deal to me, and I wanted it to go well, not because I felt sad for him at all. I wanted him to know, but I wanted it to go well so badly. I wanted him to finish that presentation and be like, and
feel good.
Cool. You know, not like, what?
If you're crying as well, if your mum's crying, you're going to think,
yes, what the hell?
I'm deficient. Like there's something
why
wrong.
Are they sad? It must be bad.
It must be bad. So, you know, I wanted to make sure it was positive. He said 2 things that were really interesting as soon as we finished. He asked if his cousin was also autistic, and he felt incredibly sad to hear that he wasn't, because he was like, what do you mean? My favorite person in the world is not autistic like me. That means we're not the same. And that made him feel sad. And the other thing he said is, where did I catch this autism? And so I think, you know, from that moment on, we've always said he's autistic. He's someone with autism. He's not got autism, because for him it was actually important for him to not feel like it was something that was additional.
Yes,
like
that's how he came.
That's how he's been born, and it's part of him so much that it is him. So and once we changed that language, and over the last few years we've changed that language to be he's autistic, not he has autism. It's really helped, I think, him see that it's part of him and not an add-on, not something he picked up.
Or that you could potentially get rid of as well.
Or get rid of with some drugs.
And I think a lot, I mean, in the community, people have different views, but I think that I am autistic is really powerful. Like I know my eldest says that, rather than you have it, because it's you, it's your brain, it's everything that you are.
And I think that's for those more sophisticated thinkers. So I know with my daughter, it's interchangeable, and I don't know that she's really thought one way or the other about that, and so she doesn't really care. But it's like anything. It's what I say to people is, find out what the individual chooses. It's everyone's individual choice to decide how they're referred to.
Absolutely.
And no one else is going to tell you what the right or wrong thing is. So if you don't know, ask them, how do you prefer, if you're in that conversation.
I think that's important, isn't it? Who are we to, I mean, at the moment, I'm just doing what, you know, I have to do to kind of get by with his life. But as he gets older, he's going to be in charge of that. He's going to be owning his autism because it's him. It's him. It's let him choose how he wants to be labelled.
Yeah. The thing about diagnosis is there's so much. Like there's no way we're going to cover all the things that we might like to say about it in one episode. But, I think what we've sort of come to or start to really realise is that it's different for everyone. The process is different. How we react to it, the extent to which we understand or expected it or not, and then how it plays out, right? Because I think we could have a whole additional conversation about how it changes, right, year on year, and we've talked quite a bit about how.
I think that's it. I wish if there's one thing I wish I knew back then, which is it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint. Yeah. And the diagnosis is only the beginning. And I felt like I had to learn everything within weeks of that diagnosis. I must cram, I must find out everything, get all the experts' opinions, find out how best to help my child. And actually, your child will keep changing. Yes. You'll need new things, nothing stays stagnant.
And there are no perfect answers.
No
you
magic
can do
answer.
all your reading. Doesn't mean you're going to find it.
No. And another thing I'd like to add as well, particularly if you have someone that was born female or is a girl, is that you might present to a psychologist or seek out a diagnosis earlier in their life and not get one. And because they are really skilled at masking, and then it might eventuate. So if you feel as a parent that something's not quite right here and you've done your research or you've seen it with one of their siblings, most likely that is going to eventuate. But if you're getting the therapy and you've got the support around it, it might be coming, but that's okay. Just continue with what you're doing and slowly you'll start to see those behaviours emerge, particularly when later in that primary school years is what I think.
Yeah, and also I think what you said earlier, Bel, about if you're getting the child the therapy, the support, actually that's what you'd do anyway if you had a diagnosis. So, yes, it's helpful when it's time, if that's what you choose to do, because it gives you that extra information. You can seek out more, but you can actually do plenty for your kid in the absence of it by just addressing the things that are a problem or that they're struggling with.
And if it's not a problem till it's a problem, you always say that, Anna.
Yeah.
So for parents where you're thinking, do I need to go down this path or not, you will know. Yeah. Like if you trust that gut instinct, like this child is not coping very well in a number of different settings.
Yeah. Or they just can't get to school. They can't do the things that you would reasonably expect of a child of that age.
Yeah.
And that they're suffering for that.
Yeah. And that diagnosis will, from my perspective, really help you and change things and start you on an important journey.
Yeah.
Yeah, trusting yourself. I think that's been the biggest thing because it's so hard. We're like, you read all these parent books and you're like, what? Everyone's telling me different things and why is my child not doing that? And I think having the confidence in yourself to trust your instincts and say, this isn't working, or I don't think this is my poor parenting that is making this issue. Because I think a lot of the time I felt, I'm just failing. I'm just failing my children.
Still feel like that all the time.
And that's really hard because when you're feeling like that, you feel so low. You feel like, God, if I could just parent a bit better, maybe they wouldn't be so stressed. Maybe they would be able to go to school. Maybe they wouldn't be so anxious. But it's not. It's not about how you parent necessarily. There is a neurological difference there and you need to learn about it, and they're going to need an expert support system in place that goes beyond the parent, beyond you. But I think actually we all know, I think when you get that niggle inside, you need to trust it.
And I think that also applies to the people that are supporting you. If you don't think that the therapist is managing your child in the right way, find another one. Your gut continues to be important as you work through the things that you're doing to respond to their needs.
And that comes with time. Like I think at the start you don't really know, and you having that support network and having a friend or anybody who can say to you, you know what, you're right, that doesn't sound right with that therapist, or that doesn't sound right with that teacher or that school.
Yep.
And then you start to have the confidence, which we're all at, where you're like, okay, I'm going to make that change.
Yeah, which is partly the other thing we want to do with this podcast is to build that community and allow people to come together and be able to connect and share. So we can talk about that another time, about what we're thinking about doing that, because we've got plenty of ideas. All right, ladies, an absolute pleasure as always. Can't wait for our next conversation.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.